I think everybody should be concerned. It's a really serious day. This is the first time in 30 years seeing one in which that ratio is going up over time.
Well, you've seen the title. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today, Canada on the brink of economic collapse. This is coming from the interim parliamentary budget officer, the one that the Liberals don't like because the man is so honest. Jumping over to CTV, we got a panel here discussing this, the economic collapse we're seeing here.
And those comments come ahead of the highly anticipated fall budget set for November 4th, a budget that Prime Minister Mark Carney has said can be characterized as one of both austerity and investment. I was saying just in the break, like this is the interim PBO, so he doesn't have a long contract, but he is really swinging high here. Like he is not holding anything back. What's your take on what he is saying today?
Well, my take is, first of all, happy birthday to Marlene Polyev.
Join the chorus,
lady.
yeah.
Very nice lady. But, you know, he's obviously very concerned about this. He's a professional. He's assessed this. He's looked at the numbers. He has declared that it's unsustainable, meaning that the government is on a track to bankrupt the country. So they've got to get their act together. You can't have it both ways and say you're going to invest, but it's also prudent. I mean, this is just the height of weasel words, and they're going to have to find a way to get the spending in line, or else we're going to see our interest rates rise. We'll see inflation spike. I mean, there's all kinds of serious implications if they don't start to treat this seriously.
Our current debt service costs, or even just the amount of debt we're taking on each year, is increasing at an alarming rate without any economic recession or headwinds. Not to say we don't have economic challenges, but my point is your assumptions are that the economy actually is growing from here on out, that unemployment is falling, and we're still seeing some fairly serious increases in annual debt service costs, and substantially, as my colleague has just pointed out, up to about $80 billion a year. Is that correct?
That's great.
Right. So if unemployment goes up further or growth is not as high as you project, what will happen to the deficit and then the subsequent debt service costs?
If the economic path is worse than projected or worse than we anticipate, then the deficit figures will deteriorate.
Right.
We're feeling pretty good about where things stand in the short term. So where we are now and going out over the next 12 to 18 months, the big question, and it's a policy question, which isn't in our bailiwick, but certainly is in the bailiwick of parliamentarians, is where do we end up in years 3, 4, and 5?
I don't know if I want to see parliamentarians' bailiwick. Sorry, I had to. Bailiwick, one sphere of operations on particular area of interest. There's a new word. Never heard it in my life.
Given the rupture that the Prime Minister has referred to, given the Prime Minister's reference to, quote, there's no going back, how do we get to those areas of growth? What are the policies that are going to be in place to ensure that the Canadian economy can return to its full potential growth?
So he mentioned there, we basically got a run out of 12 to 18 months before we're completely screwed. A year and a half. So if this gong show keeps continuing, we finally get election in a year and a half, and then Pierre comes in. He's going to have essentially a destroyed country. So we either need an election sooner or our country is going to be toast. And then what, is America to come annex us after we completely implode? Or what's going to happen? Because as Jason's pointing out there, we need to reverse the trend. Well, this is the trend. I put all these in line here. Carbon tax comes in 2019. Carney becomes Trudeau to advisor in August 2020. August 2020, Carney also joins Brookfield as vice chair of ESG and impact investing. They've been planning this for years. Mark Carney, the godfather to Chrystia Freeland's son. Chrystia Freeland, obviously deputy prime minister to Justin Trudeau. They planned all this from the start. They start implementing clean fuel standard, all this crap, 2022, growth funds, accelerators, yada, yada. And here we are. All this wasted money. Nothing's happened. A bunch of CEOs got a couple good years of really big paychecks. Multiple companies got a bunch of our money, but our country's crumbling. This has to be reversed. We have to start building pipelines and LNG and start exporting immediately. Unfortunately, that's not what's going to happen.
I guess what I'm highlighting, or what I'm glad you're kind of confirming, is we might not be in the worst economic environment yet. And what we're seeing actually with the levels of spending is we're increasing the risk to the fiscal framework of the country before we're in potentially much more serious economic challenges. Like if we're going to spend almost 14 cents of every dollar on interest on the debt without a recession in the next couple of years, what could that be if there is a recession? Could be 15, could be 18. Would you view that as a risk to the framework?
I would view it as, and going back, quote, no one ever get laughed out of the room by quoting the governor of the Bank of Canada. It's positive growth, but it's not going to feel good for most Canadians across the country. And yeah, in a situation, it definitely gives one pause where the economic numbers are positive and the fiscal numbers are negative and substantially negative.
If only we had a brilliant banker as a prime minister, then we'd have someone be able to crunch the numbers and get us out of this situation.
So, Marco, what is your take on, I guess, kind of the communications around how the government intends to approach this? Because I think particularly through the campaign, there was a lot of talk from Prime Minister Mark Carney about, exactly what Monty just spelled out, like a real point of demarcation, for example, between himself and the previous prime minister, particularly in rhetoric, I'm speaking. But then since then, there's been a little bit more confusion. Like, does it mean attrition on the public side? Does it mean actual cuts? Is there, what will be operating spending? What will be investments? Like, what is your take on where the communications are and where they need to be?
Well, I believe the communications are rooted in the prime minister's economic credentials, which are beyond reproach. He's got experience having managed two significant global crises, one the global recession, 2008, and then Brexit in the UK. And I think that was a large part of the way in which he grounded his case to become prime minister and to form this government. Now, that said,
the problem with that, though, is people didn't look up what happened with Brexit. I've done multiple videos on that. Mark Carney's net zero agenda. It is destroying that country. Regardless, he's right, though. Mark Carney has a lot of experience as Bank of England, Canada governor, etc. The question is, does he have the ethics and honor to use that to make Canada a better place, a richer place, a prosperous place? Or is he going to use that knowledge and those smarts to enrich his own bank account? Canada, the industrial implosion, investment in industrial machinery and equipment volumes. Kaboom. Where did Trudeau come in? Right there. Right there. Boom. Straight to the bottom. America's going to the moon. Are we tired of losing yet? Maybe it's time to stop voting for Liberals.
And so I think three things need to happen. One, the government definitely has to reduce the deficit, and there's clearly work to be done there. Two, we need to spur on growth, and I think that the government's announcements around major projects. And three, I think the government has to take full advantage of low interest rates to reduce the service debt charges, which also place a burden. So doing those three things and certainly seeing that come to fruition as quickly as possible is a way in which the Prime Minister, not only through his communications, but through his actions and the government's actions, can continue to keep the trust of Canadians when it comes to steering the economy through this global turmoil.
So Marco Mendicino here doing his best here to prop up his buddy Mark Carney. This is an interesting panel because we've got two Liberals, and I'm assuming this guy's a Conservative because he keeps blasting hard. I don't know who he is, but obviously James more Conservative. No NDP representation here.
Do you think, James, though, that thus far the communications from the federal government have been as clear as what Marco just laid out?
No. Look, for 9 years, we were told, hear us now, believe us later, that deficits are going to be good because it'll lead to economic growth. It may not happen right away, but in the fullness of time, this is all going to work out. Well, now here we are, 9 years later, after people saying these aren't deficits, these are investments, and now the fiscal anchors are blown. We had a contraction in the economy, jobless rates are up, investments are down, and it didn't work. The 9 years of Trudeau failed. And by the way, I was struck by two numbers in the report. The number $68 billion, or just north of $68 billion of what's projected to be the deficit for this year. I did a little bit of math. I thought you might like this, Vashi. $68 billion. Put this number in context. Based on market cap and current evaluations of Canadian companies and organizations, this is what $68 billion looks like in the current economy. $68 billion would buy you the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Montreal Canadiens, the Ottawa Senators, the Winnipeg Jets, the Edmonton Oilers, the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks, the Toronto Blue Jays, the Toronto Raptors, Air Canada, WestJet, Lululemon, Canadian Tire, and you'd have a few $1 billion left over. That's the scale of the deficit that we're talking about.
Connor McDavid, James. That's the question.
Yeah, well, yeah, about $1 billion left over for Connor McDavid. But these are staggering levels of indebtedness, and of course, it's stacked on top of subnational, provincial levels of indebtedness in British Columbia and Ontario that are also unsustainable. We're on a bad track, and I hope that Prime Minister Carney can match his words with his actions. But it's going to be a very, very tough pivot.
That was a great way to represent that $68 billion by James. Putting out in terms when people can really think about it. All those sports teams combined, throw in Lululemon, Air Canada, Canadian Tire. Like, what's left?
I think everybody should be concerned. It's a really serious day, right? This is the first time in 30 years that we've tabled an economic and fiscal outlook. where the fiscal anchor of the general and probably most important fiscal anchor for any government is a declining or at least stable debt to GDP ratio. And this is the first time in 30 years that I've seen one in which that ratio is going up over time. So that's definitely a cause for concern. Certainly on our end, we're hoping and certainly expecting the government, as part of Budget 2025, to clearly indicate what the government plans to do to address this and potentially address this problem, because it's certainly not sustainable.
Certainly not sustainable. First time in 30 years, we are on the brink of collapse because of these liberals. They're tossing our money out willy-nilly everywhere. Look at this. So moving over to this section here, the liberal net zero timeline of shame. This is all the investments, EV programs, and all this stuff that has gone bankrupt. I'm adding some new ones here. So look at this. PowerCo Canada Inc. EV batteries. This is the reason why we're in bad shape. I mean, 13.1 billion, that's with a B, $billion sent over to this company here, PowerCo Canada Inc., to make electric vehicle batteries. $13 billion. They could have built 3 bridges from Vancouver to Vancouver Island with that money. 3 bridges. Well, probably in today's money with inflation and horrible supply chains and stuff, maybe 1 bridge. But still, if China came over here to build those bridges, they probably could build 5 of them. And I'll use that example because it's so ridiculous. Special contributions agreement with EV battery manufacturers to contribute to the department's mission to support industrial transformation of key industrial sectors, automotive, strengthen domestic supply chains, and help Canada transition towards a competitive low-carbon economy and achieve its emissions reduction targets. They're intentionally destroying our country. They're trying to do this carbon capture, low carbon initiative here to make money off these carbon credits. It's all a big scam to make money off us, and they're destroying our country in the process. As you see here, there's this one too, Nexstar Energy, EV batteries, $14.5 billion. Shout out to Mario, he found these ones. See there, $14.5 billion, and what is this for? The exact same thing. You can see Nexstar Energy there, electric vehicle battery manufacturers. This is a disgrace what they're doing here. They could solve hunger across Canada with this. They could build bridges, set up mines, pipelines, infrastructure, whatever. We could build our country with this money instead of giving it to one company. And once again, same thing here. Transition towards competitive low carbon economy, reduce emissions targets, yada yada.
I think one of the, just jumping off, if I've internalized what James said, right, and I hate to say it, but do I have to buy the Montreal Canadiens among everybody else? Anyway, I'm joking. Don't hate me. I'm a Leafs fan, and I'm now the hate mail will really come. Christy, if I've kind of internalized what James is saying, right, I think one of the key points that I would say, might inform or should inform communications is if you decide that there is still a lot to spend on what you are labeling as investments, you need to do more than tell Canadians that they will get a return on that investment, which is, I think, where like the gap existed with the Trudeau government, right? Like often we were told X, Y, and Z will materialize in this way, and that didn't end up being borne out. So maybe you have to be more specific, and there have to be more sort of, I don't know what, but guardrails or something that show that you will be held accountable for that. What are your thoughts on that communication?
Yeah, for sure we need more guardrails and accountability. Going back to what James said, he's talking about Justin Trudeau, the 9 years of Trudeau. Let's not forget, Mark Carney joined as Trudeau's advisor and Brookfield Asset Management August 2020. So since August 2020, these policies that have been rolled out, as you can see, clean fuel standard, these all came from Mark Carney. Mark Carney was saying, Trudeau, this is what you got to do. So essentially, Trudeau has been in the background running the show with all this garbage, which isn't working. So we've already had 5 years of devastating economic struggle because of Mark Carney.
I heard Minister Champagne saying today, or yesterday, that they're going to keep, their guardrails are going to be balancing the budget and getting their GDP to debt ratio under control in 3 years, which makes a lot of sense given the massive mess that Justin Trudeau left them with. And I think the key communications things and the key actual things that they need to be doing are saying, we are going to spend less. And I don't think this idea that they're going to do this, what's ultimately a pretty small cut to the public service that would get it only back down to 2020 levels is something that they should be thinking about expanding. So talking about how they would actually spend less. Because in the Trudeau government, what he was doing is he was figuring out how to spend more on public services and at the same time smothering economic growth, which is how we pay for those services. So I think the Carney plan has got to be, we are going to spend less and we are going to create economic growth.
Shocking report from the fiscal watchdog today showing that Carney is putting Trudeau's planned deficits on steroids, adding more than twice as much debt as the previously most expensive prime minister in Canadian history. More inflation, more interest payments, more economic pain. That is the cost of Carney. This orange is Trudeau's projected debt, and Carney's is this blue. This is the brilliant banker that's going to save Canada. He's wrecking our country, and he's doing it intentionally with a smile on his face because he's 91% invested in America.
Is you have to invest in economic projects like ports, like railways, like pipelines, like mining infrastructure. You cannot, when the economy is the way it is right now, with the mess that Justin Trudeau has left, you cannot do this. No one can do it without actually spending a little bit of money to invest in economic growth.
Yeah, it's not just the social programs, though. Trudeau spent billions sending it over to Africa, to all these countries. To the World Bank, there was $3.4 billion alone, let alone all that gender-sensitive farming nonsense. If you cut out all the foreign affairs spending, the grants, all that crap, we would cut this deficit down by, 15, 20, 50%? It would be a lot.
I think the issue is that there's also, Monty, though, other things that they have committed to spending money on that Canadians have, to be fair to the Trudeau government, come to rely on, like childcare, like the Canada Child Benefit, like dental care, like pharmacare, which they have said that they will. And I should be fair, the Conservatives said during the election that they would maintain the current services that Canadian access to. Like, those are big line items as well. So other than
those programs are garbage and should all be thrown in exactly that, the garbage where it belongs. They're all rolled out poorly. The dental care program, people show up expecting to get dental care and then get an $800 bill. Pharmacare covers barely nothing. Get rid of these programs.
The public service, where else do you find, spending cuts?
Well, as Pierre Poilievre said in his interview with you a few days ago, there's $12 billion in spending on consultants that could go away. I think Canadians would cheer that. I think the government needs to move quickly to clear away the No More Pipelines legislation, get some of those major projects moving. I mean, you do have to have economic growth, and it doesn't require money to do that. It requires the government to provide some certainty to companies that are risking hundreds of millions and billions of dollars and have signaled over and over again for a decade they need that certainty. So where is it? Why is the Prime Minister cavorting around the world with other world leaders when he should be at home making sure that those major projects actually get underway? Where's the certainty that could come from repealing that legislation that's standing in the way from increasing economic growth? That's what he needs to be doing.
Mark, I'll get your
This guy's spot on. He's bang on. Mark Carney cavorting around the world. He gets back from the UN. He spends one day in the house and then boom, he's off to Europe to talk with all his European buddies, trying to get his net zero agenda all drummed up. He wants to get some contracts signed. We'll send you the lowest carbon, this, that, and the other. Get that whole carbon credit system going. Doesn't care about Canada or destroying our country, running us through the ringer here. Long as he can get that system going and get those shares in Stripe blasting to the moon, that's all he cares about.
My interpretation, and this is what I put to Mr. Poilievre when he raised the same thing, is their belief is, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but their belief is that C5 will provide that certainty by allowing it to override the stuff that you're talking. I know the argument is take it all out.
Where is it? Where is it?
And I'll give the floor to Mark.
Yeah, where is it?
But I guess the sort of central cleavage point is, if I'm listening to everything in the aggregate, James, yes, you're saying you're going to cut spending. I understand that. Do you need to invest a ton in order to spur economic growth, or are there other things you can do in concert to maybe mitigate some of the level of investment? I'm not sure. It seems like we'll wait till November to find out the answer, but what is your thought?
There's one thing we need to do. Pierre Poilievre keeps saying it. Get out of the way. That's what the Liberals need to do. Get out of the way.
Yeah, I mean, look, he will, I think, offer to try to do some of that. But there's clear evidence that there are some failed government policies that aren't working, that are bad for the economy and wasting a lot of money. I mean, the Build Canada Homes project that Marco just outlined, I mean, it's great. They're booking $14 billion. It's great in thematics. But if you look at the development community across Canada, they're all looking at this and saying, this is crazy. This doesn't make any sense. $14 billion for a few thousand homes. It doesn't make any sense at all. And the scale of spend is as outrageous relative to what the return would be. This is a supply and demand issue with all kinds of regional development issues that doesn't require $14 billion from the government of Canada to be funneled through bureaucracy. It's a bad policy. And we've already spent $750 million that you talked about yesterday on your show, Vashi. $750 million in a gun buyback program that hasn't recaptured a single firearm in this country or made anybody safer. Like if you can't admit the obvious stuff that has failed is all around you, and you can't sort of reverse course on those policies. The Prime Minister has shown some leadership and done that one on carbon pricing and a few other policies that made sense to reverse on. But on the spending side, I hope there is some courage shown in the November budget, because there's some debris at his feet that is easy to sweep aside of failed policies that cost a lot of money that would do a lot of good in order to get our fiscal balance back in the right direction. James
going off here. So the question is now, why is he doing this? I mean, we know why, because you're watching my channel here. So many of these mainstream media, all of them, they just sit back. I'm not calling out James or whatever, but just in general, they sit back and just say, well, these are bad policies. These are bad decisions. But nobody's saying, why is Carney doing this? When it comes to business, most things are guided by money. People are greedy.